Great. Welcome, everyone, to the sixth Bioregional Open Dialogue. And this one is focusing on Bioregional Knowledge Commoning. This is a series that we at R3.0 started the beginning of last year. We started doing open dialogues just as an organic response to demand from folks in our community. And starting this year, we devoted these open dialogues exclusively to the bioregioning context, given our own organizational full-on commitment to bioregioning and place-based, place-sourced engagement going forward. So this is our sixth, and you can find the other bioregioning open dialogues that we have done in the past on our website. I just posted the link in the sidebar. This particular edition is one that I'm particularly excited about. It is on Bioregional Knowledge Commoning. And it features Andrea Farias, who is the R3.0 research fellow working with us on this front. Benjamin Life from OpenCivics, Anshul Ojha from the Desert Resource Center, and Jessica Zartler from BlockScience. So this is a really, really great lineup that we've got here today. The general flow of things is that Ralph will give a little bit of background on the logistics and sort of engagement guidance. Those of you who have been with us before know the deal, but for those of you who are just joining us, Ralph will just go over that briefly. Then I'll provide some background context on our session today, and then we'll move to each presenter who will speak for 10 or 12 minutes about their work, and I'll provide some context about what each person will be speaking about. And our goal is to really try to have that part of our time together covered in the first hour, so that we have the second hour where we open up to dialogue, to be true to the name, what's advertised on the tin, so to speak. So that's the second half will be open dialogue, and Ralph will share a little bit about the sort of how we handle that. So without further ado, Ralph, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And my task is the easy one, just to do the recurring engagement guidance that we've been doing for a couple of times now already. And then hand it over back to Bill for the content of the session. Just generally, we would ask you to please stay on mute when other people are speaking. We very much welcome you to have your video on, your cameras on, but of course understand if there are situations where you can't do that. That's all fine. Normally in these dialogues, questions come to mind, so we would ask you to add your questions in the chat sidebar and do that right as they occur, so that you don't forget them. We'll curate these questions and cover them in the facilitated dialogue segment. And for efficiency reasons, if there are similar questions coming up, then we may summarize these questions for simply efficiency reasons, or we may ask you to voice them yourselves. And then we would ask you to keep your questions succinct, so really on the topic, and be respectful to all others in the dialogue. We also have a Commons and resource link in our Open Dialogue Google document. Those that have been with us in these dialogues before will know that document. We collect additional information, resources that you may have, or other comments that you would want to make there. Simply to also prevent distraction in the sidebar during the session, and that doesn't become sort of a dialogue in itself. That document will remain publicly accessible also after the event. It's a living resource. And if you make a contribution to that Google document, please just add your name before your contribution so that we can identify you as the author of that contribution if you wish to be identified. And then you've also heard it, we record these sessions for public posting on our Open Dialogues landing page. And then there will also be LinkedIn posts that will make these recordings available, plus slide decks that got shown. And we collect these slide decks and put them together into one concise slide deck before posting. So you would also find the full documentation of this session then also both on our landing page, on the Bioregionalism landing page, but also in public postings on LinkedIn. I think that's all that I want to say, and hand it back to Bill for the intro to the session.
Great, thanks so much, Ralph. And to provide sort of where this particular session comes from, I'll trace a little bit of history of our work at R3.0 as a way of contextualizing at least how we came to be hosting this. So R3.0 was founded in 2012, 2013. And we spent our first decade or so of existence pulling together what we came to realize was a knowledge commons around the practice of sustainability, particularly in corporate and investment contexts. And so we used a participatory process, a working group process, to pull together a set of 9 different blueprints on various different areas, such as reporting, accounting, data, new business models, sustainable finance, et cetera. And I think about halfway through that, we recognized that what we were building was a knowledge commons. So when we decided to transition to focusing on bioregioning, we recognized that this history of building knowledge commons was something that we could offer to the movement. That's actually something that Joe Brewer from the Design School for Earth Regeneration reached out to us probably about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, 2 years ago, to suggest that he knew our due process for the blueprints and how they resulted in this knowledge commons. And so that was something that we decided would be one of our pillars of focus alongside convening and self-governance. Those are the 3 pillars that we're focusing on in our bioregional work. And I would say very fortuitously, late last year, Tyler from Bio5 Project introduced us to Andrea, who was conducting independent research at that time on Bioregional Knowledge Commons. And so we had a conversation. She interviewed me for that research. And when we launched our pillar, it seemed to just make sense to reach out to her, to invite her to become a research fellow. And so we have since then launched a community of inquiry and practice around Bioregional Commons. I won't say much more than that. I don't want to sort of steal the thunder from Andrea's presentation, but this is just by way of giving you background of why we at R3.0 are focused on bioregional knowledge commoning, but by no means, just because we've sort of stepped into this space, we're not at all alone, and we're only taking leadership in the sense of following and helping to coordinate all of the great work that's already been happening out there. And so you're going to get a chance to see some of that great work today. And so each of the presenters are a member of this community of inquiry and practice, But again, their work long predates that group. And so you're going to get the benefit of seeing work that's been happening for quite a while. Benjamin Life from OpenCivics will present second on the work that they've been doing, literally pulling together a bioregional knowledge commons, and in particular, sort of the background, both technological and social protocols that go into that. Anshul is joining us from the South Asia Bioregionalism Working Group, and his work in the desert context, gathering the knowledge that is specific to that context, really blew us away the first time he attended one of the Community of Inquiry and Practice calls. And then finally, Jessica. Actually, our relationship with Jessica goes back to our 8th blueprint, the funding governance blueprint, where we spoke with her about doing some work together on that, that has really blossomed now into collaboration. Jessica most recently presented on bioregional commoning at the International Association for the Study of the Commons, a panel that I co-chaired with Roger Matledge a week or two ago here in our neck of the woods, my neck of the woods, at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. So hopefully that's sort of sufficient. I know it doesn't really do justice to the realm of bioregional knowledge commoning, but that's what we're here to do, is to get a more well-rounded angle on this. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrea, and then again, we'll go to Benjamin, and then Anshul, and then Jessica. Each of them will present either slides or spoken for, let's shoot for like maybe 10 or 12 minutes. And then we'll move into dialogue. And as Ralph had mentioned, if you can just put your questions into the sidebar as they occur to you, and add your comments or links into the resources document. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Andrea, who's going to share both about the research that she's done, some of which has been published by R3.0 and some of which remains to be published, as well as the community of inquiry and practice that we're co-stewarding. So Andrea, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Yeah, so to provide a little bit of context, about a year ago, I started a research project funded by a collaborative kind of Gitcoin round by OpenCivics, by Benjamin Life, who is here. So thank you, Benjamin. And the objective was just to understand the bioregional movement or space. Who are the organizations that are working in the space, and how are they connected together? And more specifically, what are the needs in this space that can potentially be addressed in order to improve collaboration and essentially grow the bioregional movement as a whole. So I'll just share just a little image from the report, just to give kind of a visual aid for what that looked like. So this is just like a simple mapping, starting to think about what are the essentially structures within the bioregional space. And from that research, what came out again and again was just bioregional knowledge commons. I did a bunch of interviews, and everyone I talked to was, we need to be able to share information. We want to know what organizers are doing in order for other organizers to be able to learn from that, and everyone to be able to move forward together. So this theme just kept repeating over and over again across everyone that I spoke to. And so I focused my research on that, basically understanding what is a bioregional commons, what might that look like? And some of the the outcomes of this research were, I mean, I think one of the key things that came out of this is just to understand that that we need a plurality of bioregional knowledge commons, right? So one dimension that we looked at is so bioregional commons, bioregional knowledge commons, of course, can exist within a specific bioregion. And so that means that organizers within a bioregion might create a commons of what they're learning about their specific bioregion, what is happening there, maybe kind of what are the ecological systems, what are the social systems. So that's one layer of bioregional knowledge commons. And then there's another layer which we talked about as the meta perspective or meta knowledge commons, which is thinking about, well, what are the different patterns that are emerging from this organizing that we can kind of abstract a little bit and think about how can we identify these essentially protocols or structures that can be applied across different bioregions. So this might be maybe approaches to governance within the bioregion or creating a bioregional trust. So these are patterns that, although they might be adapted to a specific bioregion, they have relevance across the board. And so so this is kind of an important differentiation to recognize, also because, you know, when it comes to bioregional knowledge commons at a local level, of course, local organizers should and do have kind of the agency and kind of you know, this should emerge from the bioregion itself. But when it comes to the meta layer, there's kind of a need to actually be able to look across the bioregions and say, what is everyone doing that we can abstract into patterns, and that there might not just be one of these meta bioregional knowledge commons, but a federation or a plurality that are looking at different aspects of bioregional organizing. So we're really thinking about how do we avoid centralizing the knowledge or this ability to create and distribute knowledge, and rather kind of create structures where different organizations can collaborate on documenting and building this knowledge. And so this is kind of the premise of the bioregional community of inquiry and practice on bioregional knowledge commons, of how do we bring different people, different organizations within this space or this movement to actually talk about and discuss and come together to engage over how do we build systems and structures that can allow us to document and share knowledge to bioregional organizers and create these learning structures that are not concentrated within one organization, but allow us to coordinate across all the different organizations working within this space. So yeah, and this group has been going for a few months now. We've had a few different meetings. So we've been talking about just what does a bioregional knowledge commons look like, what might be the technology, what might be held within it, you know, how do we interact with it? Is it a technological tool? Is it more like a set of interactions between people? How do we make it relational, recognizing that not all knowledge can actually be stored digitally or even written down on paper, but really emerges from this relationship between people? And how do we start looking at concrete practices that bioregional organizers are implementing in their place, and start to recognize the patterns that are emerging from those? So I've talked for a little bit now. Bill, is there anything else that you think I should cover within this explanation?
Yeah, Andrea, I guess the one thing in addition might be the upcoming releases of your more detailed work, the databases in particular, because that starts to key into this practices, patterns, and even ontology that we've been discussing in the community of inquiry and practice. So it'd be great to just get a bit of a perspective on that database research that you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I actually have it right here. So also as part of this initial research project, I started documenting organizations and initiatives within the bioregional space, just to understand even what is bioregional organizing, or what are the initiatives that define bioregional organizing. And so I started to create this database that now has over 100 organizations and initiatives or projects created by those, or implemented by those organizations. And then from these are essentially the practices that we spoke about. So these are the practices that the bioregional organizers are implementing. And from this database, I've started to abstract already some patterns and think about, well, how can we understand what these patterns are and what bioregional organizers are doing. So I've started creating my own pattern database as well of the initiatives and organizations. So of course, this is kind of one of the experiments that I also created as part of this report on Bioregional Knowledge Commons, just to start to understand what a bioregional commons might look like. And so this will also be published soon. And of course, this is just a database. It's not a commons. So I think something really important here, and that we've also discussed in the community, is not just how do we capture knowledge and document all these initiatives, but a commons is really a shared resource, kind of used and maintained by a community of practice. So until there's an actual community that is using and stewarding these resources, or this knowledge, is just a database. So how it's definitely useful to start to document these organizations, document these practices and patterns, but also how do we think about actually making it into a community-owned commons, essentially, and make it not just useful, but actively maintained by bioregional organizers themselves.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea. And is that, I guessed from your inflection that you were winding down there. You all set?
Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I wasn't planning on doing this, but I think it may make sense to just share very briefly one of the slides, because we just shared this with the community of inquiry and practice. This is a slide that our colleague Roger Matledge prepared and presented in the International Association for the Study of the Commons panel that he and I co-chaired on Bioregional Knowledge Commons. And this is just a visualization of the practices, the various practices that might be happening at individual bioregional levels, or even around specific areas of practice that could then be sort of distilled into a kind of pattern using Christopher Alexander's pattern language process. That's actually, there's an appendix in David Bolyar's book, Free, Fair, and Alive, his book with Silke Hilfrich, that actually walks you through a pattern mining process. And so what you can see here is that there are pre-existing practices that could feed into the identification of patterns that then could inform new practices or new instantiations of that practice in specific bioregional contexts that would then, feed back into this recursive process. So just since we mentioned that, it seemed to make sense to go ahead and throw that slide up there, because that's sort of where the community of inquiry and practice is right now. So with that, let's move over to Benjamin. Benjamin, as I mentioned before, OpenCivics has been doing really robust work on bioregional knowledge commoning. And in particular, as I mentioned, sort of both some of the technical aspects and protocols, but also the social protocols that go alongside those. So, Benjamin, I hope that's an accurate distillation of your work, and over to you.
Amazing, thank you. Let's see, I do have some slides that I can jump into. Good to go. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your time and attention. I'm very excited to share what we've been up to in this domain. Let's see if this is coming through. Yeah. Great. So the background that I'm bringing to this conversation is as someone who's really committed to providing infrastructure that supports the bioregional movement. And what I want to speak about today is our kind of design philosophy in how we approach these types of infrastructure questions, which can really be kind of distilled into this idea, these set of ideas around open protocols, institutions, and social organisms, which I will explain what each of those are. But to start, and I have to do this less and less as the meta crisis accelerates, just articulating why this matters in the context of the meta crisis. Daniel Schmachtenberger has kind of articulated these sort of three attractors of where we might be headed based on the kind of breakdowns that are happening at the systemic level. And one of those is chaos, just sort of a collapse of any kind of social order. The other one would be authoritarianism, this kind of Palantir techno-fascist state. And then the third, which is the most important, is distributed coordination. And that really bioregionalism to me represents this design pathway where we can actually create a truly participatory, resilient, and vital civilization, but that has to happen through agent-centric, grassroots, distributed coordination. And so any infrastructure or tool that we create, we want to have the necessary affordances to be able to support this kind of grassroots bottom-up approach. So anything that's overly centralized is fragile and insufficient to the task. And that's why we're taking on some of the challenging design questions that we currently are. And I sometimes call this life-centric cybernetics. How can we have our digital social systems reflect the logic and intelligence of living systems? And I think throughout bioregionalism, there's this kind of provocation of how are we aligning our human systems with the way in which ecologies operate. We're looking at that from a governance perspective, but also from a social and technical perspective. How do bioregions themselves self-organize, and how can we take our human efforts at bioregioning and align them with those design principles? And so these three ideas are kind of our best effort at articulating some of those life-centric design principles. We think of open protocols as the DNA of social organisms. So the thing that makes them unique is that they're socially reproduced. They don't exist in a vacuum. They are patterns and protocols that are enacted by communities. They're not static, unliving things. They're made alive through their enactment by people. And they're easily adaptable. They can be forked and modified. They have this kind of genetic quality where they can be mutated and remixed. Extitutions are kind of extitutional theory coming from some of the blockchain governance work in Europe, are non-enclosable relational social organisms. So if you can imagine, if an institution is derives its kind of utility from enclosure, what it's able to enclose around, extitutions are providing a similar kind of utility, but through the web of relationships themselves. And so we're trying to unenclose knowledge. We're trying to unenclose these kind of best practices for how to self-organize. And social organisms are just our way of talking about groups that are self-organizing, respecting the consent and agency of members. So if you can imagine, how could we reimagine organizations in the context of a living body? Wherein your cells are not in a rivalrous relationship with each other as part of you. They have some degree of autonomy, but they're also working in consort with the other organs of your body. And so we imagine the knowledge that's being shared in these kind of knowledge commons to help to be supportive to people forming social organisms. And I love this quote from Buckminster Fuller: if you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking. And so for us, civic utilities and commons architectures are those tools that are entraining a new way of being around non-rivalry and how we share knowledge and information. And that these are practices that will be enculturated through the kind of design approach that we bring to the infrastructure itself. That if we design the infrastructure in a way that's supporting local autonomy, people will learn how to be more autonomous locally, instead of relying on big organizations to manage their data for them, for instance, like enculturating those patterns of local data stewardship. And that these kind of tools help us discover our place in this larger story of the movement that's unfolding. Michelle Bowens likes to say that cosmolocalism is like the right hand to bioregionalism as the left hand. And one of his quotes about cosmolocalism is that what is heavy should be local and self-governed, and what is light should be global and shared. And so if we're coming into this kind of non-rivalrous solidarity relationship as bioregionalists in bioregions all around the world, we need our knowledge to be locally contextualized, but we also, as Andrea said, we want to take the generalizable patterns and share them in a non-rivalrous way, and have global data interoperability. Oh goodness. Okay. I want you to be able to see what's underneath here, but I tried to insert our schema here, so that you could see a little bit of what this looks like in practice. But I want to start by just sharing kind of the categories of our social organism ontology. Because this is one way that we're looking at structuring information in a library, not the only way. But we're trying to distill at a pattern level what are the kind of fundamental building blocks that support self-organization. Membranes being what are the threshold conditions of how people can join? How do they exit? How do they enter? We're looking at things more holonically. So we know that things are nested inside of each other, and we're thinking more in terms of networks than in terms of organizations. And so we want to be able to index groups based on their relationships. What are the groups inside of that group, and what is that group a part of at a larger scale? And irrespective of these particular categories, the point of trying to come up with an ontology like this is to be able to have a JSON format that is able to provide structured data that helps to connect some of these patterns, so that you could start to see that a food sovereignty network is connected to a playbook for food rescue, is connected to a protocol for local food system development. And so we can start to see that the knowledge that we're trying to share is strategic and functional, so that it's helping people to discover within the domain of food systems, here are all of the different methodologies and approaches that people have taken in different bioregions around the world to create more closed loop food systems and healthier food systems. And so we want to create a back-end data structure that enables the discoverability of these kinds of methodologies across bioregions. And we recognize that there is a kind of opinionated ontology that we're proposing here. And that's always the challenge, is how do we not constrain things by imposing an ontology that limits the autonomy of the local group to define their knowledge in their own way? And how do we provide enough structure where when that information is shared, it can be discovered by other people who are accessing that same knowledge pool? And so the kind of key considerations around the technical stack here, we want to have composable infrastructures that allow communities to steward their own information and also utilize it in novel ways. We want to ensure interoperability, which I'll get into in a second, and also modularity. So instead of thinking in platforms, thinking about kind of universal data structures underneath that can then be recontextualized or represented in different front-end interfaces that are drawing on the same underlying data structure. And so we're working on this idea called the Open Protocol Library, which is where we're trying to store these kind of self-organizing patterns and playbooks and protocols that are intended to help bioregional organizing teams to self-organize in their bioregion. And we're trying to do that in a way that's maximally interoperable. And so are the kind of principles that we're working with here are assuming that local first is really essential. Having data silos that live on kind of cloud platforms that are usually proprietary and require ongoing subscription fees just is not a viable strategy for both the level of data interoperability and federation that we need, as well as the kind of siloing that creates. We want to have a federated knowledge commoning system, which allows for people to push knowledge into the commons and pull knowledge out of the commons, and recontextualize it based on their needs. And so in order to do that, we've come up with a much less opinionated metadata structure that allows for some basic tagging and references to the tags that are sourced from the source database. When it's shared into the Commons database, we use artificial intelligence to try to remap some of the categories that are in the local database into this format that's hopefully maximally pluralistic, where we don't actually have the same kind of opinionated ontology that I just shared, but allow for people to index information without having to apply their tags. But if they want to pull that information back out, they can then apply those tags back onto the document. And so we want to preserve as much of the tagging information as possible while still pushing it into the commons in a way that allows other people to pull it out without needing to transform it very much. And so we're currently working on both like a GitHub backend for this kind of knowledge commons, and working on a suite of AI assisted tools that help for this kind of this kind of data interoperability question. How do we map schemas onto each other? How do we preserve the data from one set of schemas, translate that into a kind of universal schema, and then support end users on the other side who want to pull that information out into their local commons, to reapply certain tags or reinterpret that data, to recontextualize it based on whatever ontology they're using locally. And so that strategy of kind of translating as information comes out of a local knowledge system into a global commons and then pulling that information out, that's the strategy that we're currently exploring. And we're trying to, the end goal here would be having a kind of global language for social processes, where we're able to easily fork and remix the knowledge that's being shared because it's segmented into categories that allow us to say, oh, we're going to swap out sociocracy for consensus here, or we're going to use this distributed resource allocation tool instead of this other one. And basically, we want to provide a sufficient amount of structure to the data where those kinds of remixing choices can be made by local communities, while ensuring that that information can still be shared across communities. So that's what we're actively working on. Both the AI tooling for translating schemas, as well as the kind of GitHub methodology for pooling knowledge in a commons and having access of multiple communities that are contributing to that commons to push information in and pull it out. And so if that inspires you, I would love to collaborate on building out some of these ideas, and also making sure that everything that we're working on is supportive to this larger movement that's not about us, but about how are we serving life and how are we making it easier for people to find the information that they need to get involved in their bioregion. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Yeah, and one thing we don't get as much of now that we're in the Zoom world is the sort of the applause at the end. So thank you to folks for doing that. We can come up with our own protocols that aren't going to get in the way of the microphones here. So thank you, Benjamin. And thank you. I'm seeing already some questions in the sidebar. I think we're going to have a really good dialogue when this happens. And Andrea did respond in the sidebar. You're welcome to do that, but we'll go over those again just so that they get onto the recording as well. So don't feel the need to do it in the sidebar if you don't want to. From this sort of broader context, we're going to go into a more specific context of the desert context with Anshul Ojha, who, again, we intersected with through the South Asia Bioregionalism Working Group. Anshul works with, is founder, I believe, of the Desert Resource Center, and is going to share with us information about knowledge commoning in this specific context, which obviously has very important applications in desert contexts and adjacent contexts. In fact, many things that we don't realize touch deserts that we're not fully aware of. So Anshul, over to you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everyone. It's pretty exciting and already an amazing conversation which has set out here. I am going to start sharing the screen. Just confirm if this is visible.
There you go. It's working on it.
Now? Yeah, is it now?
It says it's okay. There we go. Now it's there, and it's just needs to go into presentation mode.
Yes, right. So again, thank you very much. I am, bringing in slightly different perspectives. I wouldn't say different, but we're going very specific to desert and how a very specific bioregional or contextual or a limiting context could help us derive both knowledge and the derivatives for a larger applications. Desert Resource Center is a collective for the last 10 years. We are with range of partners, community-based organizations, citizen groups, NGOs, people in policy. What we are really trying to argue is, can we start looking at deserts differently? So this is what I'm attempting to, talk here. There's this in Indic texts, there's this a reference from Upanishad, and it says very beautifully, the creation is whole and complete. From the whole emerges creations, each whole and complete. That take the whole from the whole yet remains undiminished, complete. And this sounds so bioregional to us. This is exactly bioregion, and essentially this is the conversation which all the bioregions, within as well as outside, as complete wholes, should have as something that we are trying to, and for us, we look at land, life, and living as three sort of core verticals, bioregional verticals, and through these we attempt to, work through partnerships, knowledge, technologies, and resources, uh, attempting to sort of, see how not just the knowledge piece but also the practices get enriched. So ultimately, something which you showed earlier, the knowledge and practice patterns, that how effectively that works for us. What you see on the screen is actually a living bioregion with this whole, all of its character. How we know deserts so far is a very I would say depressing outlook. We have been told that deserts are wastelands. We therefore overlook the ecological functions. Just to give you a reference of how the planetary systems are operating, the sands from deserts go to ocean. From the ocean bed, phytoplanktons come up and they consume the that sand which is rich in phosphorus and other and there are gases which are released, which is the onset of monsoon. Now these planetary systems are happening. We know about these, yet we argue differently about deserts. Um, how do we really look at it? Or, are there enough interventions, knowledge derivative interventions which have happened uh, for desert bioregion, the cultural aspects, how the people they coexist with in a very minimalistic uh, lifestyle. Because of these kind of narratives, what we have seen, definitely in South Asia, but also in Africa, is there is a land-based manipulation and repurposing. Um, there is also a very big issue which has come up, is in the name of regeneration, we are just arguing for, or we're just talking about greening world over. What we are seeing is how this knowledge is actually becoming a global language for deserts, and that's problematic. uh, 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 what we are looking at again is the environmental dimensions, social dimensions, the families, the communities, the inherent knowledge within the communities of resilience, the economic dimensions of the desert-centric production systems, or the value chains, and how all of these actually could have beautiful conversations with both other bioregions as within. So this is our sort of core, or how we pivot. Uh, just to give you a broader picture, this is the spread. So broadly, the entire red to deep below is what we are looking at, because that is the irradiation space. Just to translate it other way, all these yellow patches are the desert and xeric shrublands. So this is the spread of not connected yet the one bioregion globally. Uh, I think what we really need to, and I'm not vertically going deeper into what we are doing at the practices through the derivatives of the knowledge, something we can discuss, later. If time permits, I would also like to, play a brief video of the bioregional knowledge of the community. Uh, but essentially, what we are uh, arguing is deserts, have lessons of resilience. uh, uh, we can learn so much from these bioregions, especially in the polycrisis times. Uh, 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 those are freely available open source information passed on orally from generations. Every new child born here is the first lessons are actually the lessons of resilience, right? So what really we are talking about is how do we create those new metaphors, not just the language knowledge, but how do we create a language altogether new, uh, 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 where we sort of talk about global desert cooperation, collaboration. What we are working on is collaborating with partners in different deserts. We have initiated some knowledge commoning collabs with Ethiopian lowlands, something that we are attempting to replicate with other uh, uh, deserts. So, platforms or alliances like a global lowland or global desert alliance might well, work to deepen the knowledge commoning work. The bioregional labs, something that we are doing in India. How can we, replicate those models in different areas? Um, Very recently, we have also started deepening our work in uh, mountain desert, cold desert, uh, uh, which again opened a very new possibility of looking at Scandinavian deserts, ice deserts, and seeing how we could come out of the ages of the First World, Second World divides, North, South, and really look at those different kinds of commonings. Um, so this is some sort of initial uh, enablers for the dialogue later. I want to really pause here, leave you with this paradox, this thesis paradox, and this is very pertinent when we talk about restoration in desert context. When the thesis, this ship when each repair and to the point that there is nothing original in the ship. The question asked is if whether it is the same ship, and this is exactly the question we need to ask for the bioregions in the transformative regenerative spaces, very pertinent to the desert. So let me pause here. Perhaps this could be a good point to pause, and then we open up later. Yeah, this is a very interesting comment from Fernando there, um, onto your screen. Yeah. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Anshul. Very provocative ideas that you are putting out there, and landing on planetary boundaries is certainly one that resonates with us. Our 3.0's history really is centered around sustainability thresholds such as the planetary boundaries. So thank you for seeding some ideas for conversation later. I may start to get vertigo. You may need to turn off your share there. But thank you for the first three speakers, and now we bring things round things out in this with Jessica Zartler again from BlockScience, and Jessica will speak about some of the information system architecting that BlockScience is doing. And again, apologies if that's my own understanding of BlockScience. I don't pretend to fully understand the complexity of what BlockScience is doing. So that's just my my own wording. But Jessica, over to you.
Thanks, Phil. It is very difficult to actually describe what we do. Being the lead of communications, we're doing constant sense making around this to align mental models about what it is that we're doing. And Anshul, I just wanted to say I really appreciate your sharing. And I'll say I have spent time in Jaisalmer, deep in the desert, did an overnight camp there. And I have been in a few different deserts, lived in high desert in the west range of Colorado mountains, but no desert has so deeply touched me as the desert there. So yeah, and also just you're bringing up the Upanishads in our panel at IASC with Bill. I was saying, hey, we have thousands of years. This isn't the first time people have tried to, talk about knowledge commons here, and how do we have ontological pluralism. This has been a discussion for thousands of years, and particularly a lot of wisdom from the Indian subcontinent. And I talked about the story of the blind elephant as kind of a metaphor of what we're trying to do here. And we all have some piece of the puzzle, and we're kind of blindly feeling this elephant and sharing, our different mental models. So that is true at BlockScience as well, about describing what we do. But I'll stick to the topic here, and just I'll touch on BlockScience a little bit towards the middle, but just to focus here. And I just want to share too, and
if you could go into presentation
the share mode.
Yeah,
yes,
great.
I'm
Thanks so much.
doing that now. Here we go. Mode.
Yeah, just that one.
All right, awesome.
Perfect. Looks great.
How's that? Thanks. Okay, I'm trying to arrange my screen here. All righty. Move the little bubble over here. So yeah, Bill asked me to talk a little bit at IASC, and that presentation, you can get the slides from Bill's LinkedIn. I talked a little bit more about how to maintain, as Benjamin was talking about, how do we kind of honor the different ontologies and hold pluralism in our digital systems without committing what has been called epistemic violence. And you can kind of look into that. There's a lot of literature and focused more on looking at how do we decolonize infrastructure. And that's a very pertinent conversation, but Bill asked me to go a little more high level here, and this is going to be super high level. We at BlockScience are actually actively, and for many years, we've been around for about 7 years, but come from different threads of folks working on our team that have been working on different layers of this, both in kind of data provenance, as Ben was saying with some of his questions, how do we have provenance in our data? And there's multiple layers of the social, technical, governance. So I'm going to super high level it, because some of these systems we spend, a year or more working on building these systems because they are complex. And if we want to build long-lasting infrastructure, we approach building digital infrastructure like we do a physical bridge. When you build a bridge, you have modeling, testing, simulation. You're harmonizing across trade-off decisions of, okay, are we optimizing for the environment? Are we optimizing for building materials that are local? Are we optimizing for cost? So we have the same approach in how we look at digital infrastructure. But Bill asked me to talk today about specifically this kind of social and technical aspects, and how do we look at architecting this for fruitful bioregional knowledge commoning. So this came up in a conversation with my chief engineer when I was preparing for IASC, and I really love this frame because we talk a lot in bioregioning, and particularly around lineages, indigenous lineages, and others who are speaking of right relationship with land, with community. And when we talk about architecture is actually relationships between different parts. That's really the core of what architecture is. So all of these stories, all of these different ontologies, and even you can hear across the speakers today, all of these different kind of frames that we're bringing. And so we already have an architecture because we already have relationships. I already said, oh, I've been in Jaisalmer. So we're these connection points. Relationally and socially. And digital systems currently are usually a bad representation and are imposing, as Benjamin was kind of talking about, an architecture that doesn't enable and support healthy ecosystem dynamics. It's actually the technical infrastructure itself, because it dictates a lot of what happens, relationships. It's literally shaping our field of action and what we can and cannot do. And many of those decisions, of course, are siloed, are based in platforms that are rooted in colonialism, rooted in capitalism, and certain patterns. So me and my personal reason for being on this planet, I've deeply explored looking at patterns and how do we maybe break patterns that are dysfunctional, and how do we instill new kind of healthier patterns. So looking very deeply at the kind of layers of the architecture, and how can we design architecture technically that supports the social and doesn't impose a structure. So we're looking at these digital systems as digital public infrastructure. So it's not a platform run by a company, an organization to make money off extracting people's data. How do we actually have an open public infrastructure that anyone can build on, that's interoperable, that enables the social to flourish, for new ecosystemic niches to kind of form and create, say what they value and put value on that, and create value systems and share knowledge. So again, very, very super high level. There are many frames and kind of, I guess, prisms you can look through and how to design. But this is, because we're talking kind of social technical systems, we're keeping it really simple here. Social infrastructure, so relationship protocols, cultural interfaces that enable kind of this meaningful connection, and these trust networks that already exist, that maybe you can't see them or they're not. How do we kind of look at these from a digital infrastructure perspective? There's already a web that's physical, so we're looking at how do we integrate the digital and the systems that already exist. And then governance infrastructure. So of course, decision-making processes, conflict resolution mechanisms, power sharing protocols for equity. I'm working on a huge project right now looking at building digital public infrastructure for healthcare financing. And one of the organizations that we're working with is called Wellbeing and Equity in the World. And so they are looking at what are the power dynamics that this digital and technical infrastructure is instilling. How can we start to shift that by looking at power dynamics assessments and considering different frameworks for what is equitable. And what is equitable becomes kind of a value, and people can have different ideas about this. So we need technical infrastructure that can support different values, but ultimately those values get encoded. They get encoded in algorithms, they get encoded in policy. So how do we ensure that we can honor different ideas around what is equitable, and that the technical architecture can support this? So that's just an example of something that can be governed. And then, of course, the technical infrastructure itself. So this is protocols, data architectures, like I mentioned. How do we, for example, express not only quantitative data, but qualitative data in stories? So this is something that we're often also looking at, is this diverse ability for expression in the technical architecture, and how do different types of data taxonomies or the way that we build the infrastructure enable this. So these layers have to be considered together. Technical choices, as I said, are really shaping the social possibilities, and the social needs have to drive the technical design, and design itself is an act of governance. A research colleague, Amber Case, wrote a really great article about this, and it's so true. I mean, every time we make a decision, we're likely making it as an engineer for somebody else. So we try our best to integrate stakeholder feedback, or ideally we're having people who are in these communities, someone in Jazz Elmer, at the table if we're talking about building a system for this community, not just at the table, but ideally we have, an engineer, or we have these communities included in what we're building. So this is just an example of a very general model of how this could express. So we talk about things a lot in layers or kind of sandwiches because we have to consider all of the different aspects of the digital infrastructure. So we have kind of like the technical down here. This is like how things are computed, the utility and data storage. Then we look at kind of like systems operation and maintenance, where we're looking at protocols and platforms and applications, and where do we put certain aspects of policy or designing an algorithm depending on what the requirements are of the system. And then, of course, you have kind of the middle here, which is a lot of the governance, the authority, and the policy, who is making decisions on the design of the digital infrastructure, or how are protocols that are inoperable enabling, to Ben's point, not just organizations, but networks to interact. That was from my colleague David Sisson, who's our data systems architect, who was a neuroscientist before he was a data scientist. So he's looking at this as kind of distributed cognition in digital systems. And he would be really, not wanting to say that because that's a pretty big assertion, but he has some great talks on that, and I'm happy to share it later. So yeah, very super high level, what we might consider as design principles. And again, this isn't me dictating. To Ben's point, this is open for discussion. In a model-based systems engineering process, we would spend 3 to 6 months just doing kind of requirements gathering and stakeholder interviews. But as far as design principles, I think we may be able to have some agreement on that. We want it to be polycentric, so not having one decision authority like a Facebook or whoever other, insert transnational, extractive corporation here. But we would like this to, have different centers of authority in our federated bioregional knowledge commons. I think we can agree that we want it to be generative and not extractive. And we use this term called requisite variety, which comes from the control theory literature, that a lot of my colleagues have a robotics engineering background. So they're using these principles, and it's also in kind of cybernetics lineage as well, in that the infrastructure complexity has to match the diversity that it's seeking to coordinate. So when we are working on this decentralized financing system for healthcare, for example, we realized we were trying to do it in 2 layers, and we actually had to add another layer to honor the complexity of the different frameworks around what is well-being and what is equity, and how that may express in then governing algorithms or policy or certain design as governance decisions that are being made. I think also we can all agree that we would like this thing to be living. We want it to evolve. We don't want it to be some static digital monolithic thing that just exists forever in a state. We would like it to actually serve the purpose that it fulfills. Speaking of cybernetics, Stafford Beer talks a lot about that, and I think the cybernetics people really get the living system stuff more than a lot of other kind of engineering technical infrastructure lineages. So anyhow, again, like I said kind of earlier, we want to shift away from platform thinking to ecosystem thinking, and from efficiency to resilience, which a couple people have already noted here. Challenges, many, creating, as Benjamin said, we love also our biological references of, membranes. So what membranes need to be permeable, which ones need to be semi-permeable? Well, that depends what kind of temporal scales that we're talking about, and whether you're in indigenous knowledge systems, who, if you spent time with indigenous communities, there isn't really a past or future, and time isn't linear. So, this is kind of really important when we're talking about how are we building digital systems that may try to enable some of these expressions. Also epistemic traditions, we've noted the different ontologies, different kinds of governance cultures, the technical infrastructure has to support this, and resource flows as well. And then I added in there maintenance, because a lot of people like to build things. A lot of people love to design things, but let's talk about maintaining things. And we talk about this a lot in engineering. And I think maybe it's a generational thing that newer generations just don't have, or, the concept of the 7 generations, because a lot of different reasons. So how would we maintain systems like this? And how would people be both intrinsically motivated to do that and also benefit from doing that, which is a challenge I've worked on building knowledge commons, and in the context of Web3, I've done some experiments in raising money as a community and governing money with a couple hundred people, and building a knowledge commons digitally. And I'll tell you, to get people to kind of maintain this, and that's a lot of the challenge. And then the kind of little owl key insight here is, talking about also the decolonization, how do we have effective infrastructure that can enable this productive interference between these ontologies without forcing false unity or this colonial subsumption, which is like probably the biggest challenge. This is just, I want to show some humans. The recent Cascadia Biofire conference was so spectacular, and just echoing again, you know, we have folks from donut economics. We have, you know, communities like the Quaker in BC, Canada, who are working on new economic models. We have so many different ways of knowing, so many different knowledges and all these different ontologies, but they're all coming together to work together. So that's a lot of what we're talking about. So practical next steps. Again, how do we build these kind of tools and protocols that enable local autonomy with the global coordination, as Ben already kind of touched on, knowledge sovereignty to honor value, like to value where things are coming from and to not have epistemic violence, and resource sharing. Diversity preservation also. So, you know, we want to pattern, but we also want to hold the nuance and the kind of contextual application. And of course, trust building. Can't really do that with technical infrastructure, I don't think, but we could talk about that. And yeah, so there's BlockScience. I think probably I should start wrapping up, so I won't go as deep, but just to say our mission is, again, to bridge digital and physical worlds through sustainable engineering. And yeah, we're looking at these things as public service, building infrastructure. This is something Zargan likes to say. Systems engineering is the worst method for managing complex systems, except all the other ways. And we a little more informally say we're trying to bend the long arc of the future away from dystopia. My colleagues love diagrams here. So yeah, we are actively building knowledge organization infrastructure systems using model-based institutional design. So applying model-based systems engineering to institutional design analysis, which is kind of a new thing. And finally, yeah, this is one of my favorite diagrams. And again, it's in a triangle. We might like to see it in a more nested representation, but we don't have a great designer. This is from David. He's a great designer in his own way. He's an architect. So yeah, he has this really great article, Why Is There Data? Talking about how can we have digital systems that help us to move. We have data. We got big data. We got so much data coming out of our eyes and ears. We don't even know what to do with it. How can we get to the wisdom part? How can we use this for collective action? So I'll end there. And just to say also, we have some great we have a really seminal article that our chief engineer wrote on knowledge organization infrastructure that I would highly recommend reading, that really breaks this down from kind of a systems engineering perspective. And then we have lots of other things that we're working on, data provenance and how some of these layers might come together. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue.
Great. Thank you so much. Really, really rich. I'd invite us all to maybe, before we jump into the dialogue, just take a moment to let these 4 really amazing presentations sink in, and give some send some appreciation vibes out. Thank you. We do have some really great questions, and as I mentioned, you know, it's great to see some back and forth in the sidebar, but we do want to get those up into the recording. So I'm going to start with a question that Robert had. So Robert actually had a few questions, which are really good ones. I'm going to go ahead and voice this because there's already been a back and forth, but this one, the first one is to Andrea, but it may actually apply to others as well. So maybe Andrea, you take the first crack, and if others want to talk on this. So Robert was interested to know if the intent is to include search, discovery, and perhaps semantic matching to enable the community to more easily access the patterns and practices. So over to you for that question, Andrea, and then we'll open it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess here what I'd say is definitely, how do we access the knowledge effectively is a big question that we've been trying to grapple with. You know, it's no use collecting all this knowledge if we can't get it to the people that need it in the moment that they need it, right? So, of course, things like search is very important, but you know, we've been kind of exploring different areas. So, you know, do we need search? Do we need to have a chatbot? Is something that we've been experimenting with. Can we map out visually the connections between all of these things, or the connections between the organizers, or where they are in the world, or whatever visual information is relevant for people to be able to navigate that effectively? Do we, you know, what kinds of relationships need to be in place? You know, it's not just the technical infrastructure, like maybe there needs to be librarians or stewards of the knowledge that can guide organizers towards what they need, and actually be kind of like this part of the search infrastructure is social and relational and not just technical. So yeah, how do we access this knowledge effectively is a huge question. And also the other thing was about semantic matching. And I think an important thing here that we've been talking about is just ontological commoning. We've talked a lot about ontologies and how do we avoid epistemic violence. So kind of saying this is the way that we need to look at the world. People have different ways of knowing, or different ways of different kinds of languages. Even if they're speaking the same language, they might be using different words for the same thing, or the same word to mean different things. So without collapsing that into one ontology and saying, you know, this is how you need to talk about things, how do we create linkages between these different ways of knowing so that they can find each other rather than having to be one thing?
Thank you, Andrea. And I'll just, before opening it up to the other three, and in fact, maybe beyond that, I just want to mention two things from the community of inquiry and practice, which is that Grace Rachmani, and apologies, Grace, if I pronounced that wrong. I'm not sure I've ever pronounced your last name before, but she came to us from the design school, and she sort of proposed this idea of AI dialogue, that essentially a bioregional knowledge commons could have a dialogic companion of AI chat that would enable essentially querying a bioregional knowledge commons or a federation of bioregional knowledge commons, such that one can find that. So Robert, I see you enthusiastic about that. You know, of course, AI has other elements that we would need to take into consideration as well. The other thing I want to mention, just from the community of inquiry and practice, is that what Andrea just mentioned, and what has come up in several of these, this idea of ontologies, and in particular ontological commoning, is a thread. So we've only been meeting the community of inquiry and practice for a little while, but we've already gotten to a point where we feel like we're stable enough to start exploring subgroups within that. And so just earlier this week, there was a subgroup meeting with the design school, and it just so happened that a pre-existing conversation before we even started the community of inquiry and practice was around ontological commoning. And Steve Melville, who's on this call, was part of that call and has been exploring that issue in his mimetic activation platform. So Steve, I might ask you to chime in a little bit, if you're open to that, about the idea of ontological commoning. And that's a term that Simon Grant, who's also been part of those conversations, I believe coined, or if not coined, at least he is popularizing it. So anyway, those are a few things that I just wanted to get into the mix from the community of inquiry and practice perspective. But now I want to open up the question that Robert asked to the others, Benjamin, Anshul, and Jessica, if any of you have input on that. Anshul, I see you going off.
No, I do agree, and perhaps building on Andrea's remarks, I think uh, more than technology, the social infrastructure, more than the digital, the community, and really bridging those invisible barriers at times, and specifically coming in from the practices in this, uh, you know, uh, uh, they are often very invisible barriers right there. Look at bioregional practices like agroecology or pastoralism. How the knowledge is getting transferred generationally. There is a pattern. There is a selection of the the takers of the knowledge. So how do we really look at the infrastructure from the social points, from the communities, uh, and that's where the language piece, becomes very crucial. How do we really synthesize it into a storytelling, which is very local? So that I feel is this again connects to the call last week, and this whole fractal piece, which is so pertinent here. How do we can I using my practices or knowledge of a desert in South Asia, bring something to a desert in Africa. So that makes a lot of sense to us.
Great, thanks, Anshul. Benjamin and Jessica, any thoughts on search, discovery, semantic elements?
Yeah, in addition to creating a tool that tries to correlate schemas, we've also been experimenting with a tool that generates what's called vector embeddings for a knowledge library, which is how AI stores the semantic web of relationships. And the really cool thing about that is that you can then run a semantic correlation analysis that is basically using pretty simple math to analyze the semantic similarity of database entries. And of course, this isn't, as I think was already mentioned, sometimes we do use the same words for different things. And so that semantic correlation is not foolproof. But it could be a helpful tool if we're trying to have a more federated approach. When we're trying to merge databases with each other, having a tool that's able to run this kind of semantic correlation analysis between our current library and database files we're trying to add to the library. That running a semantic correlation test, basically what the tool we've built allows us to do is to set a threshold of, if the semantic correlation is above a certain threshold, we want to insert a wiki link that connects this document to another one. And so that's a method that we're using to try to, when we're merging databases, use semantic querying to provide that wiki linking, so that you can start to see a graph emerge even when the databases are not originally linked to each other.
Hey, thanks, Benjamin. Jessica, any thoughts from you on this?
Yeah, this is like a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I feel my colleagues could comment better that I've been building. We actually have our own instance of this where we have ingested all of our work at BlockScience into a knowledge management system that is queryable. And it's interesting that you bring this up because our chief engineer said, right now, let's not have it do anything else. Let's just have the best possible search that we can have. Of course, what is best search? We have to define this as well. I think, we're not the first people as well. I was actually thinking yesterday, searching Google, that this is something that they've been, working on for a really long time. Some of it public, a lot of it not. But yeah, BlockScience, we have our own kind of KMS knowledge management system that we have actually scrapped a couple of times and rebuilt it. And of course, we haven't released it yet because we have also been considering data privacy and security, especially around some of our client information. So that's something to bring up as well as PII and personal information. And Robert brought up consent. I'm personally a consent maximalist. So that would be a design property and a requirement that we would consider in what kinds of, and again, that comes back to kind of like data sovereignty and knowledge sovereignty. There's a really cool framework called OCAP that comes out of Ontario from some Indigenous and First Nations there that outlines principles. It's a framework of principles for data and knowledge sovereignty. So I think that is a huge topic and one of the reasons why our current platforms are not serving us. So I think this is like Robert's really hitting on like a core, design requirement or principle that we should consider. But yeah, I'm hoping that at some point we can release our KMS instance and have a more public version. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful for some thoughts to consider. More threads to tickle our brains.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not going to have a dearth
We
of,
don't have enough to think about.
yeah. And you referenced the chief engineer. I think that's Zargum. I'll just say I met Michael Zargum at the United Nations. We both arrived on time to a meeting, and we were the only ones there for the first half hour. Everybody else was more than an hour late to this first meeting on bioregionalism at the United Nations. And I talked to him, and he mentioned that maintenance. That was like the key thing that he was, when I mentioned the idea of bioregional knowledge commons, he's like, that is an important element. I want to take things over to Halia. You had two questions. One, the kind of the language question, and then maybe an observation about bioregional. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to just voice those. If you're in a place to go off mute and voice those briefly, that would be great.
Thanks, Bill. My name is Ralia. The fun one first is for Anshul. When you said bioregional, what do you mean by that? And the second one is for Benjamin and also using Jessica's language of bridging digital and physical. Benjamin, how do you see the expert level, which is the wisdom level? You can think of Jessica's pyramid. How do you see the wisdom level kicking in back into the data level with the pluriverse? Thank you.
Okay, so Anshul first and then Benjamin.
Yeah, thanks, Ralia. No, I mean, we have argued about this a lot, that the bioregional knowledge processes or commoning, is it a process driven thing or an actor driven thing? And so essentially, is it a bioregion just, or it is the bioregional actor driven process? And that's so the identity, it plays a very important role. Who am I doing the commoning process as an actor in that bioregion? That plays the critical role, and that's why the bioregional, and not just the bioregion. So the identity piece is, what sort of intrigues us, and that's something we like to sort of pick people's brain around.
Hey, thanks, Anshul. Benjamin, over to you with the clearly the easier of the two questions here. Just kidding.
Yeah, just so I fully understand your question, is it around the trade-offs of prioritizing expert voices, or how to relate to the distinction between people who hold particular expertise in how knowledge is shared? I want to make sure I answer it accurately, so I want to get a better sense of what exactly
I'll
the question
clarify.
is.
Thanks, Benjamin. I'm more concerned about, you mentioned tagging, metadata. I'm just curious how you're going to do that when languages are different. How do you visualize bringing the pluriverse into, well, the Anglosphere in your case of tags?
Yeah, so the goal that we have is for the more technical components of this kind of knowledge sharing methodology to be as abstracted away as possible, in terms of what are the front end tools that we make available. So imagine a bot where if you have the agreement of the consent to share a particular piece of knowledge, you could even invite that bot as a viewer of your Google Doc. You don't have to change anything within your Google Doc around how you structure the information. And that bot would be able to extract some relevant contextual information to help index whatever is shared in that document, and index that in a knowledge commons that other people could access and pull from. I think going across language barriers will be very interesting in terms of, I think one of the principles I didn't share was having a human in the loop for all of these AI semantic processes, so that there is a human who's evaluating the translation that's occurring, so that we don't actually lose things in that translation process, whether that's like generating tags based on the content and to make sure those are accurate, or translating existing tags. And the idea is to just have enough semantic information in the metadata for it to be discoverable, but to do that in a very pluralistic way, where, so one of the other approaches that we're taking is having a tag in an index of tag indices. So basically, if you're a contributing organization to this knowledge commons, you articulate your own ontology for yourself. We identify soil as a subset of food or something like that. You know, that's how you're framing it. And so when we translate that into a knowledge commons, we want to preserve that tagging structure, while kind of removing the particular, moving that information from structured data into tags, so that when someone tries to pull that information out, the tool will look at the tag index of where it came from and the tag index of where it's going, and do its best to translate across the ontologies, so that the global layer that I mentioned has as unopinionated as possible of an ontology, and preserves the ontology of wherever the data is coming from, so that there's that data sovereignty isn't lost in the translation process, where yeah, it's kind of over my pay grade as well. I'm just learning about some of these practices, but that's sort of the strategy that we're taking of how do we create kind of functional pluralism, so that we're not losing the contextual information of local knowledge when we're sharing it globally, but we're also, you know, doing some type of translation to make it more discoverable outside of the local context, and acknowledging that that's going to be an imperfect process that we're going to do poorly at, and especially in the larger the gap between cultural contexts, the more nuance there will be in how that translation takes place. And so I don't feel like I know enough to fully answer that, but I'm in the inquiry with you. I fully appreciate that kind of orientation. So I hope that added something useful.
And this is an issue that isn't just for the knowledge commons side of bioregioning. And we're confronting this in our convening work, where, you know, we're taking an Anglo-centric approach, for example, to our conference, and we're exploring, you know, is Zoom Translate going to be a sufficient solution, or do we actually need to look for other more robust solutions? So that's actually an active issue right now. So thank you, Halia, for that. Steve, I'm just going to check, is this a question, or do you want to comment on this particular thread? Because if you want to comment on this particular thread, let's hear from you right now before we go to the next question.
Yeah, it was a comment in this thread, and I also thought I thought it was a nice segue into ontological commenting, because I think that's at the heart of what that last discussion was about. So I'll just briefly mention that, and Bill mentioned Simon Grant as a seminal thinker in this area. I'm just in inquiry with the rest of us, so I'm not claiming authority here. But what has emerged from the conversations I've been interacting with Simon for 1.5 years now on this. Basically, it comes down to decolonializing, preserving sovereignty. And what that means is don't, give up the attempt to create the single global ontology and get everybody to agree on it, right? It's not going to happen anyway, right? So just acknowledge that up front. Preserving local autonomy, local language. I love that Anshul brought in the language about how desert is framed and how what Jessica was saying about digital systems and our language both shape our field of action, right? And bioregioning, from my perspective, is hyper-local. It starts literally from the cells in the soil on up. And so it's very contextual, right? So you need to preserve that context. But the way I like to try and describe ontological commoning is, if we all had our own private language for everything, we'd have complete sovereignty and no collaboration, other than what we could do non-verbally, which is rich. So there's two ends of the spectrum, right? There's everybody has their own term for everything. We all agree on the same terms, right? And so ontological commoning is about navigating in the space in between two primary, and because it's commoning, it's a social practice, a set of social practices and processes, right? And it's got to be sovereignty preserving, as I said, and it really comes down to synthesizing and mapping. So where groups can agree on, again, from the bottom up, two people may agree, we're going to agree to use this term to mean this thing, right? So it's possible. You can agree on the same term. Or map. You use this term, I use that term. I can understand now what you mean by that term, and I will map other terms I use into that, right? So if you have that mapping layer, then you can start to create this federation of knowledge, right? By applying these mappings. And I think that's what I heard Benjamin talking about, was that mapping and others. So that's kind of a shotgun view of ontological commoning, but I think it was relevant.
Great. Thank you, Steve, for both the sort of the input on the ontological commoning. Before, we've got a really juicy question from Stephen here, but just that was such a juicy comment that I wouldn't want to just, gloss over it. Any Andrea, Jessica, Anshul, Benjamin, any comments you want to add on this question of ontological comment? Okay, Benjamin's a no. And I'm not seeing any of you go off mute. That's actually, Steve, that was a really good distillation of ontological commoning. I'm going to have to share with Simon that he's got competition for that, even though I know that's not how you're framing yourself. From a juicy comment to a really juicy question, Stephen, your question about the economics of things, is that something that you want to go off mute and voice yourself, or shall I voice that and just? Okay, great.
I'd be happy to take a stab at that. I'm really appreciating this conversation. I'm new to the group. I'm new to this topic, and I'm learning a lot and realize I have a lot to learn. But I'm curious about the general, like basically to create a knowledge commons. How does that get accomplished? Like economically, how to incentivize people to do it? Who pays for it? Is it kind of a subscription? Is it just based on reciprocity? Is it philanthropy? Just curious what the presenters and other people on the call think about how we can create a robust bioregional commons without being extractive.
Great. Oh, Benjamin, I see you're off mute, so over to you first. And I'll have some comments after hearing from others on the panel.
Yeah, commoning is not usually a lucrative industry. And that's one of our main challenges, is that those of us who are oriented to this kind of infinite sharing economy where we're not enclosing knowledge, So much of in the United States, intellectual property law is really just trying to lock knowledge into these silos that can be commodified. And so we're up against a lot of that. And yet I think Jessica rightly mentioned, the success of Wikipedia really demonstrates that there are kind of intrinsic incentives beyond financial that do motivate people to contribute their knowledge into a commons. The kind of hybrid approach that we're taking is we want to fund researchers to add things to the commons because that's labor that they're doing. And we also want to make it easy for people who already have produced knowledge as part of their existing work to be able to share that knowledge. And so we're taking kind of a public goods funding approach to our research funding, which is to say that we're basically doing it on donation, and we're using a methodology of peer value accounting, where research pods that are contributing to the library will evaluate each other's work within the pod, and then delegate a member to evaluate the work of other research pods to generate kind of like a cascading kind of peer evaluation of each other's contributions, so that retroactive funding that does come into that research project can be distributed according to contribution and in a kind of peer validated way. But we don't want to foreground that as like we want to create a system where we're able to both fund researchers and encourage people to share things into the commons and license them appropriately so that they are truly open source. But so this funding open source and funding the commons and funding public goods is like an ongoing challenge. But I think pay to play is not really an option for us personally. That's how we're approaching it.
Great, Jessica.
I'm kind of like bursting to go at this. I guess the
Yeah.
first question is, how much time do we have? Second question is, I was going to take a note from Steve Melville's book and go, it's a spectrum. We could talk about new economic models. We can talk about old or like existing models with open source communities that have been trying to fund these things for ages. I am hoping we can just print our own money and then money won't be an issue anymore. We could have some sort of a universal basic income. But yeah, ideally we get to a point where we don't need money anymore, but it is a pretty handy coordination tool. I would say the biggest point that I want to make is that the benefit of bioregional commoning is that we can actually feed and house each other. So there are things that money cannot do that I think is like on when we're talking global and digital, that are just not possible. And I've worked on projects globally, creating knowledge commons, doing, paying for people for their contributions. Oh, are we going to do, everybody gets the same, who gets more, who's valuable? And then we spend so much time quantifying every little, nickel and diming everyone, and it's really not constructive and it creates weird things. So I just want to say, I think the benefit, again, of bioregional knowledge commoning is we can provide, hopefully, some basic needs for people to where money isn't as much of a necessity. And even if you're looking at community currencies, like a friend with Grassroots Economics, Will Ruddick in Kenya, when you're bootstrapping a community currency, you need X amount in, let's say USD, because the convenience store is selling Coke. Ideally, you have your own bioregionally local, Coke-like drink that is made with local healthy ingredients in a soda. But until then, we still have to kind of interoperate with this external economies. So there's the collaborative finance group that is a bunch of monetary theorists that go for hours. Andrea's been there as well, like talking about all kinds of new economic models, and crypto people just printing money out of the ether, literally. It can be done. So yeah, I think this is a huge question, and that's why I put in there as well. I think this sounds like a next topic for R3 to dig deeper into that, because there's a lot of different possibilities in the spectrum between we don't need money anymore and we're going to have to count every dime until we get there.
Well, that's a good tee up, Jessica, because actually we will be exploring that. So Magenta Light from Bloom Network will be speaking in. We have a Bioregional Knowledge Commons session in our conference. And so she's going to be recapping a little bit of what she presented in the IASC presentation that she did. And so if you want to take a sneak peek, you can take a look at it. I put those resources into the resource document. But not to steal her thunder too much, but essentially what Bloom enables is a layer of knowledge documenters who are connected with the regenerative practitioners on the ground. So what they've found is that the regenerative practitioners generally don't have time to do the documentation of the knowledge. In pure knowledge commoning, it's the doers who are doing the documenting. That it needs to be the practitioner. What they've discovered is that in reality, the doers are busy doing. And so this sort of harvesting of knowledge, they've added a layer, and Bloom, the Bloom Network platform enables a flow of compensation for that. And so Bloom is both the platform where the knowledge can be documented and a mechanism for financial flow. So that's just one example that I think is, it's not unique or it's not specific to Bloom Network. Certainly other platforms could do that type of thing as well. So just a little bit on that. I see Steve has his hand. Steve Melville has his hand up. Before that, I just want to check in with Andrea and Anshul if you have any inputs on this. Yeah, Andrea, and then Anshul.
Sure. I just wanted to quickly mention that on the topic of the meta bioregional commons specifically, so how are we supporting the emergence of these patterns that can be applied across bioregions? There are organizations in the space that are specifically focused on helping bioregional organizers learn and creating knowledge and documenting knowledge. So I think, a model that we can think about as well is that how do we harness these existing organizations and use the knowledge commons to help them come together around this knowledge, and then the knowledge commons is essentially providing a service that those that have the funds can contribute to. So it's also thinking about who in the space has, let's say, aligned incentives, who are we creating value for, and are they able to contribute to the creation of this knowledge in a way where everyone essentially benefits from it.
Great, thanks, Andrea. Anshul, over to you.
No, I was just wondering, there are two, important considerations. First is, where do we put bioregional commoning or knowledge, in the hierarchy vis-a-vis the global. So essentially, what is the scale of the service we are even talking about? And that is going to, bring in the question of the value of the incentive. And then you get into the whole discussion of within bioregion, setting the value, and conversation outside, and the value submission for that service. And something which you refer to is also very important. Who's paying is one, but who's getting paid in the process, the practice, or the the aggregator. That is again a very important space to really go deeper into.
Great, thanks so much, Anshul. Thanks to all of you for engaging on that. We're nearing the end here. I do want to just note that there are several questions that did get answered in the sidebar. So I'm going to try to harvest some of that into the resources document so that we're just documenting that, since it doesn't make it onto the recording. Steve, I see you've got your hand up. Maybe let's make this the last input, and then we'll round things out. So over to you with something that's hopefully somewhat concise.
Oh, you know me too well. He has to put that caveat in whenever Yeah,
It
I'll
would be
try and keep it.
you or anyone.
I will try and keep it concise. I'll just say that in terms of funding the commoning work, ultimately we need to find a way to nurture it outside of the extractive exploitative economy. I think everybody agrees on that, but just to name it. And I turn to the work of R3.0 and the context-based sustainability, think in terms of vital capital flows. It's not that there's no money, it's that and there may be no money. Peter Joseph actually is doing really interesting work right now, talking about how you get to no money, as have others. But the point is, the sacred role of money, in my view, is to promote the flow of resources. So if we can get reciprocal value flows that nurture the knowledge commoning, that don't depend upon suckling at the teat of exploitative extractive capitalism, those are the models that we need. Now, in the near term, compost out of the old system, absolutely. But just like any inputs in a regenerative system, external inputs should be minimized over time, right? It should be self-perpetuating. So, and the final thing I will say about that is then, let's not lose the bioregional context, which is what I think Jessica was bringing in earlier. This is bioregional knowledge commons. Don't separate the information commoning, the knowledge commoning, from the flows you're trying to establish, the vital capital flows you're trying to establish within the bioregion. And so I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Great job of saying actually quite a bit in a concise space, Steve. So the caveat was actually delivered on very well. Thank you so much. We're right near the end here, and so I want to first pause and thank all of our presenters, and just give a round of applause and hands to the presenters. Really thought-provoking work here. And what's really great is that this is not just a snapshot in time, that this is work that is ongoing in the context of the Bioregional Knowledge Commons community of inquiry and practice. And obviously, much of this work is also going on outside of that. If folks do have interest about the COIP, community of inquiry and practice, please reach out to me and or Andrea on that. We're co-stewarding that. This is also where I often will announce the next one of these open dialogues, and the further we get into the year, the more we're a little bit behind on having the next one planned out. So I am in conversation about the next one, but don't have a date or theme nailed down yet. What we do have, though, is the next bioregional carrying capacities session. So this is the parallel sort of sister series where we're not looking at just dialogues broadly about bioregionalism, but a very specific slice of bioregionalism, the bioregional carrying capacities. And so that actually is tomorrow. This is a very fertile week. So tomorrow we'll be speaking, the 7th session, we'll be speaking with the California Donut Economics Coalition, Franziska Redeker, Alites Aritza, and Indy Rishi Singh, excuse me. And that will be, I just put the link to that into the sidebar, so you can do that. I think it's going to be at 11 Eastern time for me. So keep your eyes out for other bioregional open dialogue sessions on our website. We've got the link to that particular series right here. I'll throw it into the sidebar. And then finally, I did mention the conference, and maybe I will let myself rest from speaking and just hand it over to Ralph here to say a few words about the conference before we sign off. So Ralph, if you're open to it, over to you.
Yeah, as it's 1/2 past the hour, I'll just do it in 1 minute. We're approaching the conference, which will be on September 9 and 10, where we have 2 afternoons, European time, mornings, US time, late afternoons, early evening, more to the east, where we'll have 4 sessions fully devoted to bioregioning and some intermediate sessions in between. And we also have these confluences that Bill was already mentioning that run in parallel. And this is a big success. Khalia, for example, will organize one together with Annalika and others, more than 40 of them around the globe, and bringing in 6 different continents at a ridiculous amount of different time zones. So we're really looking forward to that. And that also is just the starting point for feedback sessions with these conference organizers, and then also more and more getting into the idea of moving that towards regional, continental, and global congressing, because that's the ultimate goal that we have as R3.0 to play a useful role in developing that. Everything that you need to know is on the website, conference2025.r3-0.org. I'm pretty sure that Bill or somebody has put in the link already into the sidebar. You'll also find beautiful bioregional art, which we also added as an extra tab to this year's conference site. So yeah, we're really looking forward to that. It's only about a good 2 months away, so time is running fast. So thanks for attending this. Again, another very fruitful and great conversation. I wish you all a good rest of your day wherever you are around the world, and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Take care and keep your eyes open on social media. We'll post the links to the recording for this in the coming days. Take care.